Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today I'm covering another really popular interaction from Dominaria United. I'm going to be talking about how the new read-ahead mechanic interacts with Vorinclex. So let's say that Amy plays a Weatherseed Treaty, and she has a Vorinclex out. What are the legal chapters that she can hit? Alright, so in order to answer this question, we'll take a look at read-ahead's entry in the comprehensive rules. And we can see that one of the things that read-ahead does is that as the saga enters the battlefield, you would choose a number between 1 and the maximum chapter number, in this case 3, and you enter the battlefield with that many lore counters. Alright, so of course, whatever number that you pick, Vorinclex is going to double that. So if you were to say 1, then that would mean that you would actually be entering the battlefield with 2 lore counters. Now, if you had a normal saga that didn't have read-ahead entering the battlefield with 2 lore counters on it, then what that would mean is that you would get the Chapter 1 and the Chapter 2 abilities both triggering. However, Wizards thought it would probably be pretty game-breaking if you could just play one of these read-ahead sagas, say whatever the highest chapter number was, and then get all 3 of the abilities in one shot like that. So what they did is they made it so that the other thing that read-ahead does is that during the turn when a read-ahead saga enters the battlefield, then you only can have one of the chapter numbers trigger, the one that exactly matches what number of lore counters that there is on that saga. So that would mean that Amy would not actually be getting the Chapter 1 and the Chapter 2 abilities. In this case, she would only be getting the Chapter 2 ability. And maybe you can see a little bit of a problem, because it turns out that since Vorinclex is doubling the number of lore counters that the saga gets, it's actually not possible at all for Amy to get the Chapter 1 or the Chapter 3 abilities, because those numbers aren't even. And so there's no possible way that you would be able to get either of those abilities to trigger on the turn that this saga enters the battlefield. In fact, if Amy said 2 or 3, then those numbers would be getting doubled to 4 or 6, and then no triggered abilities would trigger because there isn't a Chapter 4 or a Chapter 6 ability on this saga, and the saga would immediately be put into Amy's graveyard because it has too many lore counters on it. So Vorinclex doesn't seem like it really synergizes super well with this mechanic. Now, I will say that this rule that says you cannot get the chapter abilities that you jump over is only true for the turn that the saga enters the battlefield. So if Amy were to play the Weatherseed Treaty and then get the basic land, and then after that play the Vorinclex, then the next turn when Amy goes to put a lore counter on the saga, then she's going to of course be putting 2 lore counters on the saga, and so she's going to go from Chapter 1 to Chapter 3. She actually would get the Chapter 2 and the Chapter 3 abilities in this case because the saga did not enter the battlefield this turn. Alright, so that pretty much covers all the options if the Vorinclex and the read-ahead saga are both on the same side of the battlefield. Now let's take a look at what would happen if, instead of Amy, Nick was the one who controlled the Vorinclex. So right out of the gate, we can see that every turn when Amy is putting a lore counter on the saga, then that's going to get rounded down to her putting 0 lore counters on the saga. So basically, whatever lore counters that she gets when the saga enters the battlefield, that's pretty much what number it's going to stay at, unless she finds some crazy way to do something, or unless the Vorinclex leaves the battlefield somehow. So let's take a look at what sort of legal options Amy has for getting counters on this saga when it enters the battlefield. And in order to take a look at that, we're going to need to remember that you're only allowed to choose from 1 to the maximum chapter number. So even though Amy might want to choose 4 or 6 counters so that Vorinclex would have those numbers and get her to Chapter 2 or Chapter 3, those are not numbers that the CR allows us to pick. Amy is only able to pick 1, 2, or 3. Of course, if she picks 1, then 0 counters are going to be put onto the saga. That's just the same thing as what a normal saga would have happen if the opponent controlled the Vorinclex. Now, there's no rule against a saga having 0 lore counters on it. It's just something you don't see very often. So that would work out, and you would have 0 counters on the saga in that case. Or alternatively, Amy could choose 2 or 3, and either of those numbers would actually just get modified down to 1 with the Vorinclex out. So Amy would be getting just the Chapter 1 ability from the saga in that case. And that's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling, but until then, I hope you have a great day.